think we're ready to get started, folks. Before I turn it off to Mary at the consulting company at Farrell Madden, I just wanted to say thank you for coming this evening. I think it's a great reflection of the various stakeholders, friends and colleagues that I see here, along with the various council people and staff. It's really greatly appreciated as we start this process and just move forward in a deliberate way. Again, to involve folks such as yourself and others to hopefully get an ultimate goal of seeing a bigger and better vision for our downtown. So without further delay, again, thank you for coming. It's greatly appreciated, and I will turn things over to Mary. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you all for showing up on a school night, as we say in our household. I think I want to... No, maybe I'll just keep it here. We're really excited to be here to start this process of a new vision for downtown, where in addition to the exercise we had over here, anybody who didn't get to do that on the way in, you will have more time to do that later. We're going to talk a little bit about the project itself tonight, as well as some big ideas when you think about a place like downtown. And then we're going to have a couple of other exercises for you to do at your tables as we start thinking about the future of downtown. So I'm going to jump in real quickly. I am Mary Madden with Farrell Madden. We are an urban design town planning firm based in Washington, D.C. and State College, Pennsylvania. My business partner, Jeff Farrell, if you want to wave your hand. We have a couple of our other team members here, Keith Covington from Common Ground, Elizabeth Garvin from Community Recode. We do have a larger team as we move forward, a few other folks from Partners for Economic Solutions, Alta Engineering, Planning and Design, Urban Advantage. You'll see some of the work they do, which is really great for imagining the future. They do these great computer simulations of before and after, what development could look like. But another thing I want to just highlight really quickly is we're outsiders. We bring a perspective and a lot of experience. But this project is really about you all. You are part of our team. What you see, what you know, what you like, what you don't like about downtown Cedar Falls is really what this project is about. What you want to see happen in the future as the city grows and changes or doesn't change, where change should happen, etc. So you all provide incredible local vision, local knowledge. Our task is not to come up with a plan for Mary, Jeff, Keith, and Elizabeth. Our project is help you all to envision the future. Elizabeth, if you guys want to circulate cards, one of the things that we really like to do is have people just have sort of gut responses, like the images over here. I think we have some people are going to hand out what we call our one-word cards. I think they're coming around, and they'll bring some pens, and I think you may already have pencils on your tables, or we'll get them around also if you don't have something to write with. And I didn't give them enough advance notice to circulate. My apologies for that. So maybe before we make the room absolutely completely dark, in one word on these little cards, how would you describe Cedar Falls today? Good, bad, or indifferent? Immediate response, quick response. Yes?
Are we just talking about downtown Cedar Falls, not Cedar Falls at all?
Today, this project, and I that's like the next slide. We're talking about downtown and some immediately adjacent neighborhoods, and the map is about to come up. So we are not talking about the entire city of Cedar Falls. Downtown and a couple of the near neighborhoods that abut downtown. So that question is, downtown Cedar Falls today, one word, how would you describe it? And the second question is, in the future, how would you hope to describe it again? with one word. Does anybody still need a card or something to write with? And we will have somewhere for you to drop those on the way out as we move through. So, I guess I picked the wrong order for the slides. The next slide is, what is the area that we are talking about? It is the core, the heart of downtown, and some of the neighborhoods that are immediately around downtown. What is this project? A vision for the future? And following up on that, after you all have reached some level of consensus, not 100% agreement, after the city has said this is what we want to do, we are going to take a look at the zoning for that same area and to see do there need to be any changes for the zoning for downtown and some of the adjacent neighborhoods in order to implement the vision. We know the zoning that's downtown is a little bit old. It has some updates, but some aspects of it were adopted in around 1971. So some of you probably did live here in 1971, but we probably think a lot of things may have changed since then. So does the zoning need to be changed in any way? Big picture, the kickoff is right now. We arrived in town Sunday evening. We spent the day yesterday touring around, doing some initial meetings, attending the City Council priority setting session last night. Today, we've had part of our team out walking the downtown, taking pictures, looking at what's here, what do things look like, what kind of shape are things in, what are the opportunities, etc. Some of us were in meetings with some of you today, stakeholders, downtown business owners, property owners, realtors, architects, designers, sort of getting their perspective on what's going on downtown right now. We're going to start gathering a lot of data. What you tell us tonight, we're going to be reviewing the zoning ordinance. We have folks who are going to be looking at demographics and market analysis. We want to get a really good sense of what's actually happening today, physically, statistically, in downtown Cedar Falls. We're going to be back for about a week here on the ground with a larger team the first week of June. We're going to have several public events encouraging people not just to tell us what's happening right now, which is going to be a little bit of our focus tonight, but what would we like to see in the future? What is that vision? What are the aspirations? We're going to take that input. We're going to be incorporating the analysis that we review and the statistics and data and the market, et cetera. And we will come back in the late summer with a vision plan for you all to say, yes, this is right, no, you missed the boat, for the council to endorse or adopt or ask us to make revisions to. And then that will lead into the zoning code. If there needs to be some changes, to go through the process to adopt those changes. So tonight we're doing the kickoff. We're going to talk about some issues about placemaking and physical development, etc. A lot of information, us getting to hear more from you, you hearing a little bit more about what we're going to be doing in this project. We're going to do an exercise looking at downtown, what's there right now, strengths and weaknesses. We'll get to that a little bit later. As some of you have started doing some visual preference, what do people like, what do they not like, what could you imagine in Cedar Falls? As I said, we've started this today. We'll be doing this a bit more when we come back. In the interim, we may do a few more visits via Google Earth, flying around to take a look. But for us to really get a sense of what's on the ground today in downtown Cedar Falls, when we come back at the beginning of the summer, we're going to do several workshop items, literally getting people around tables, getting people with markers in their hands, looking at maps, drawing what they would like to see in downtown for the future, what kind of new activities, what kind of new spaces, where new development might happen. We will do a lot of public interaction. We will also do a few more technical meetings. Our folks who do the market analysis may talk to property owners and business owners, asking them questions about what they see for the future. We will have a literal design studio set up somewhere in this downtown area, still to be determined, where folks can come by and see what we're working on, how we're interpreting what we heard, literally doing renderings and drawings about what new development could look like. We think that's really important. As I already said, this is not our plan. We don't like to go away and draw up a lot of designs and come back. We like to work right here so people can come in and see what we're doing. Again, we don't expect all of you to be architects. We'll be looking at drawings like this where people can scribble and write and say, this is an opportunity to put something new. Just a little close-up, just getting people's ideas and thinking about what's on the ground now, where are there vacant lots, where are there opportunities, and you talking to each other at the same time. At the end of that public workshop, we will actually have you present your ideas to each other. So we're not filtering that, so you can say our group really thought it'd be a great idea to build a new aquarium in downtown. That's probably not anybody's idea, but it is sort of, we want to hear from you, sort of pie in the sky aspirations, and then us work through the realities. Could that work here? Is there not enough space? Is there something else that needs to happen? As I said, we'll be working on site, working with the information you tell us, looking at available spaces, knowing about building design and transportation engineering. How much space do you need to do X, Y, or Z? We'll also be hearing a little bit more maybe from technical experts, maybe some transportation folks, maybe your public works people, maybe the fire and police department, so we know how they get around town. All those sort of technical details that make us keep our feet on the ground. We like to be visionary, but we also know we have to all live in the real world. At the end of that week long, we will do what we call a work in progress presentation, so you can see during the week, and we'll have a range of visual products from drawn illustrative plans dealing with a site downtown. This was a warehouse district in Peoria, Illinois a few years back. Visualizing change, looking at real sites in downtown and what might happen if some new development were to be added in. Looking at, again, a real location and sort of how that development could come online over time. We are firm believers we can all use words, but having pictures helps people imagine what could happen. And I mentioned Urban Advantage, Steve Price, we'd love to work with. He does these, takes real pictures in actual locations here and does photorealistic imaging so that you could imagine a place that you're familiar with actually getting built out and changing, moving forward. So we will have some views like this here around downtown. As I said, we'll come back at the end of the summer. We will present a draft vision document that's going to incorporate the analysis we've done. It's going to incorporate the stakeholder interviews that we've done. It'll incorporate the technical meetings. And most importantly, it's going to be based on the design charrette, the input that you've given us about what you would like to see for future development. And then the last piece, that's the boring, dry part, but we're going to look at this too, is coming back to the area and saying, what is the zoning now? What are the requirements now? What's allowed? And could the plan, the vision plan, be implemented under the existing zoning? If yes, that's great, but we feel like there are likely going to be some adjustments or tweaks. So in the fall and winter, we will actually draft recommended changes and come back for some either revised zoning for downtown or potentially some new district for the downtown. It's really technical. While we're doing the drafting, there'll be less public input, but it also will come back and we'll do a presentation to say, here's the recommended changes. And then if those need to go forward, then it will go through the official legal process of the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council for adoption. The last point is a lot of zoning really focuses on uses. Is it residential? Is it commercial? Is it industrial? And one of the things that we really focus on in our work is to think about places or the the buzzword place making. And Jeff Farrell, my business partner, is going to talk a little bit now, I think, about what does it take, what is placemaking?
Thank you. Now it's going to be tougher to work with her. One of the nice things about where we're coming into the process is this is a process you've been doing a while. If you were just starting to think about this, our work would be really scary. What we do isn't magic. We're helping you. So you've been having these discussions for quite a while, and you live here. You really know the place. We're coming in at a time that's good to start making decisions. And one of the exciting things for us about Cedar Falls, when we first saw that there's a possibility to work here and we decided we're going to compete for it, is we knew a little bit about Cedar Falls and we started doing research, which includes getting on the computer and coming in and Google Earth and dropping into the streets and walking around. It's a cool place. You've got some great stuff here. So I'm going to talk about the basic ideas that are pieces of placemaking. There may be some things here that you haven't thought about or that are new to you. I think most of what I'm talking about you're going to see, you'll recognize in Cedar Falls. As we work around the country, it's kind of like the top 6 lessons of what to do or what you have to do to reinforce a great small town. And I'm going to see if I can move a little bit more out of your way. Some really basic lessons. One is a vital center. It means something to be from Cedar Falls, and as someone said, this used to be my hometown. Now she's in College Hill. But you have this memory, a vital center, and all across the United States, there are these vital centers that until about 20 years ago were getting left behind. I think now we're starting to realize the value of them. Build on that vital center and the good character that's there. Understand real neighborhoods. And that's a physical thing, not just a word that gets tossed out there. It doesn't apply as equally to, I'm thinking about the neighborhoods that are close in, just away from the river from Main Street. Those are real neighborhoods that are part of the downtown. Walkable streets is a huge part. And by the way, when we say walkable streets, we don't mean you're just able to walk on them. But it's more than that. You want to walk on them. It's good to walk on them and interesting. And there's no auto-oriented strip that's really part of our study area. But the biggest mistake you can make in the rebuilding in your downtown is to try and compete with essentially the suburbs. You will lose because you're doing the wrong thing. But out there by the highway, they have certain things that make this easier to do, so they'll always be better at this stuff, and I think you don't want it. There's another question of how you might build the stuff out there, but that's for another day. When you're building in the city, in your town, build things that are appropriate for that town and take advantage of the advantages that are there and build upon it. If you try and build something like a strip mall in downtown, you just end up damaging the center of town. And recognize the unique community character. This happens to be a picture of Marquette, Michigan, bless you, which is up in the UP, which every time we went there a couple of times over the years, it was always February. I guess you experienced some of that just with the vortex. But they're things that are unique to Cedar Falls, and that's really some intangibles, but that's something nobody else is ever going to have, nor can they get it. And don't forget, in some ways, this is, I'd call it the goose that laid the golden egg, but the town and the country work together. One of the great things about Cedar Falls is the countryside, the rural lands around it. It's part of that unique character. And this is a picture grabbed off of Google Earth, a kind of a 3D, but Obviously not taken recently. This was in a little sunnier times. Now, I'm going to shift gears and throw something else at you. When you think about placemaking, there's an emphasis on kind of any place. And, I'm sorry, but that could be any place. You don't know if that's a picture from California or North Dakota or Florida. Someplace, this starts to be more specific. And while there are things that this is State College? Happens to be State College in Pennsylvania. There are a lot of things that fundamentally it has in common with say, your Main Street. But the more you look at it, the more that it just feels different. And that's because it's State College. Here's another shift. It seems to me, as a professional who's planner and working with zoning, new kinds of zoning, all through our lives, I think it starts in kindergarten, we get taught all this stuff about use. If any of you, to the degree that you're involved with your local planning commission or just being involved, somebody's going to build something and you're a citizen, you go down to try and be involved or just keep track of what's going. We've all kind of been taught to really focus, like micromanaging, on use. What exactly is the use? Is it a bakery or a bookstore or a coffee shop? And have a bunch of rules based on that. And I would say over-control it. There's a simpler way to do it that we think is better and more organic. I'm going to show you a bunch of pictures that in the kind of rough zoning or terms that we use in regulation, they're really the same use, but because of some differences in the form, as a place for where human beings live, where your parents or your children walk around daily, are so hugely different that we can't ignore the form. These are townhouses. These are in a development. And this is not like the world's greatest townhouses. These have some problems, but we're going to do apples to apples. Look at these townhouses. Figure they're a certain density compared to these townhouses. Now, in fact, these are just a short walk away from one another. If anything, this set of townhouses might be less density because you have to be so wide to have that double car garage door and still have room for a front door to squeeze in there. Think about one of your kids walking to school every day, walking down that sidewalk that's more cut than curb, so you're never knowing when you're really on a safe sidewalk. And that's a kind of a subtle difference. These buildings have garages too. They're in the back. So the use is sort of a medium density townhouse, but because of the way the form is arranged, it lives so much differently. Parking. You got to have parking, right? We've heard about that. We do everywhere. And at the risk of being... Parking, I would say, is kind of like everybody probably has a bathroom in their house. It's just part of the workings of a house, but you never have it. You never go over to visit somebody and you walk in the front door and walk into their living room via the bathroom, right? You don't put that up front and center. In a city, to make a healthy place, you don't do this because a parking structure right on the street sucks the life off of that sidewalk. And I think maybe if you're a single female, you might feel a little funny, wonder, are those guys dangerous? One of them's me. Not at all dangerous. But at some level, you need parking, but there are different ways to do it. That's a parking structure. This is it during the day. It is, if you look up above, you see there's not really windows there. That's parking. But on the ground floor, this is a lousy parking structure because part of that ground floor is sacrificed to have shops on it. It's because this is in a busy part of a town. This is in Northern Virginia. And on a weekend night, see if I can go up too much. On a weekend night, thousands of people walk by this parking structure who maybe parked somewhere else or came on a bus or live nearby, and they don't know it's a parking structure because it's active on the ground floor. That's a save. If that had been just a parking structure, that would have been a big dead spot in that part of the city. Now, if you look, I'm not sure if I have on the far left, there's a neon sign that says park and an arrow. But for the most part, this is a parking lot, parking structure for people who know this area. But it's signed. It's a parking structure. It fits in the city. So there are different ways to do parking. And now kind of a different category. We're going to compare another apples to apples. And for those of you who are familiar, have been to zoning meetings or planning boards, this is a mixed-use, medium-density transportation corridor you're looking at. A lot of traffic. Actually, if you continue going into that picture, you wind up in Washington, D.C., or you just about run into the Pentagon. But I'm going to show you this roughly the same traffic capacity, mixed-use, medium-density transportation corridor. But because the form of the buildings is arranged differently, it feels completely different. Now, because this is also driving into D.C., you'll miss the Pentagon, though it's off to the left. But because I live in this area, I know during rush hour, the parking on the side, because this is a big street, carries a lot of traffic in rush hour, they make you can't park on there during rush hour. So it is 3 lanes going in and out. But the thing that makes this a lot nicer than this is fundamentally parking lots in front here. It's kind of an eroded place, a lot of curb cuts. It seems like it's all about the car and barely about the person who's not in a car. And this isn't saved just because those are brick buildings. It's more fundamental than that. And there is parking in this area. So kind of a lesson is form, and we're really talking about character, which is a number of things, first, then use. We don't completely blow away use and say anything goes, but we're much lighter on it. And it's a big point about how the pieces work together. The planning effort is all about looking at that specifically. The size of the study area is such that when we come back and do that public participation charrette, you'll be able to sit around tables like this and it'll all be laid out in front of you. You'll be able to see it as a whole. Now, here's a bad example. This is how the pieces don't work together. This is, and I'd say this is the old zoning, which was all about keeping things separate and apart. So the bottom half of the screen, would be red on a zoning map. This is commercial. This is where you buy things or sell things. The stuff above on the other side of that big concrete wall, that's where you sleep and watch television. And the whole idea behind that kind of zoning way back in the day when it was invented was to keep things apart. And the more different they are, the more you need a buffer between them. Now here you see at some point, and it was probably a retrofit, somebody got tired of climbing over that wall to go shopping. Or the alternative is to get in your car and drive miles out to the big road and come around. So they put a gate in the wall and built that sidewalk. But that's not really connectivity. This is the kind of separation of things that is the worst traffic creator of all, because you have to get in your car to go buy a quart of milk. Street and block pattern, an old plat map of your city. A street and block pattern makes great things possible, and it's such in a way, it's just so simple. It seems like, how could that solve any problems? But it prevents an awful lot of them. I'm going to show you a cartoon now. This is a block. This is our imaginary block. The red on the front is trying to mimic zoning colors. That's a commercial area, a street. You can imagine like Main Street. The yellow would be a residential area. And you start to see, so there are commercial buildings on one face, residential on the other. And also the point is that you think about these streets, it's not just one side. It needs to be a whole place. So when you walk down that street, you're in the street, and the things on left and right, that one place, they're similar. They work together. And this is a lesson of the block. on this one little place. Now, conventional zoning likes to work in big blobs. This is a C1, this is a C2, this is an R4. It can be much more intricate, and I'll warn you, I'm showing you an extreme example of that, but here's one of those blocks. Say you've got storefronts on the big street, maybe those are courtyard apartment buildings. On this side street, you've got big houses. On this street, you've got small houses, maybe townhouses on the back. By the way, if you can't hear me, don't yell at me. So what you're seeing is the ability of the block to create all these different environments on one side and the other. Now, I've almost never seen a block that has this much variety on it. They tend to be a little simpler than this, but you think about it, with a block there's the opportunity for in a small space to have really different environments, more mix, different ways of living, different levels. Somebody who wants to live in a small house on a quieter street can be right around the corner from Main Street. And then there's also the possibility, this is a garage apartment, sometimes called granny flat. We all know Granny will never live there. She'll put the high school kid there. Or maybe you'll go there to get some space from your high school kid. And then you add the civic buildings like the church, the city hall, and here in this really tiny spot in the city, you have all this variety of living, different kinds of buildings, and they all work together. The changes are made in the middle of the block at the alley. It's almost always a problem if you change the zoning in the middle of the street, because you'll have something big across something too small. And living in a city should be a privilege. Now here's an example call that a commercial street. It's really a mixed-use street, but this is a fairly big street. It's like, in some ways it's comparable to your Main Street. I do recognize it has an extra story over anything you have down there right now, but basically that's an American Main Street. Under the old way of zoning, that's something so different that residential would have to be buffered from it. But in a lot of our old cities, the way we used to build them, this is the same street just looking down the side street. If you do it right with a little bit of care, it can be a privilege. If you live in that first house around the corner from Main Street, that can be a nice thing because you can walk out to your front porch and take a left or a right, whatever, go up to that street and get a newspaper, have a cup of coffee. You have all those choices available if you want them. So these things, we know how to make these things work together on a much tighter grain than we used to. Or I completely misspoke there. We used to do this a little bit without thinking, although sometimes we were a little sloppy. But with a little bit of care, this contrast between the Main Street building up here and the streets right behind it is a really positive thing. They're different, they have different characters, but they work together. And they don't need to be buffered or rigorously separated. And again, this is one of the great things you've got. Now, I think you might notice in this picture that your blocks, there are a lot of them that are go back and look at the older plats. A lot of your blocks around Main Street, because of the demand for parking or the provision of parking, I think there used to be buildings on on State and Washington. They got torn down. At least they're not there now, because you got Main Street, which is one of the best and longest, most complete Main Streets we've seen in a long time. It's a real jewel, but the parking behind it means that the streets one block off are not good places. They're parking lots. That's one of the challenges, how to do that better and still have a place to park. Street types. Most of our streets across the country for most of my lifetime, and I'm 60-something, we tended to think about streets as highways, just about moving traffic. Well, now we're thinking about streets as more, it's about moving people. Sometimes they're in cars, sometimes they're on the sidewalk, sometimes they're on bicycles. But they're all different kinds of streets. It's not one size fits all. Main streets, one kind. There'll be a first street, big streets, small streets. That on the far left is really a big city street. American main streets. They all work together, but they're not all the same. It's going to be a different street in the neighborhood than in the downtown. And the idea of streetscape, that's understanding these are streets for people. There's a part for the cars, but there's also a part for people. Sometimes that's people just sitting down and not doing much, having a cup of coffee at a sidewalk cafe or walking by it. And sometimes it's real simple. This is actually a fairly large, well, maybe it's a 4 or 5 story apartment building, but this is a fairly urban area, has a fair amount of density, and it's really simple. There's just a simple sidewalk, just wide enough, street trees, on-street parking. It's despite its density, that's a very human place. And this is also a very, well, when we took the picture 10 years ago, it was a very new building. Streets over time, that was Washington, D.C. We've screwed up that street now. But big streets, small streets, this is the great American front porched house, a great residential street, quiet place to live. And all of these things knit together, but not that. All of these streets are a public space, and we should make them a quality, good place to be. Fortunately, you don't have this kind of thing in your downtown. I think this is Grand Rapids, Michigan, big city, still a decent place, but big, probably bigger than anything you're going to see here. And some places where the sidewalk gets a little bit wider, it suddenly becomes this place that's a really positive place for people to stop in addition to walking by. And I'll talk a lot about street trees. It's something a lot of cities in other countries aren't as. I think it's maybe a uniquely American thing, but the idea of what a street tree can do. Now, obviously, this is now. But if someone had just maybe 10 years ago thought ahead and planted these trees, they make a huge quality difference. And if you have just enough soil there for the tree to grow, they do a great job of growing without a whole lot of intensive maintenance. And those trees add literally value to the property values. That street, a house on that street becomes more valuable if you want to sell it. It's also a more pleasant place to walk down, especially in August or July. And street trees are almost, they're really, as part of a larger city budget, they're a little bit, and they do an awful lot. You get a lot of bang for the buck by planting trees. However, there are limits. You still have to pay attention to what's in front of the tree. And by the way, those trees are probably going to die because you can tell they're planted in about a bucket worth of little hole in the ground with dirt. That's a tree crypt. But, and civic or public places, nice thing, you've got parks around town. Different kinds of them. This is a brand new development. This is Florida. I don't know, there are palm trees there. Don't look at the palm trees. Or the banyan. That's like a ficus tree you might have in your living room. But brand new place in Florida. This is French. I'm pretty sure that's Paris. just a tiny little spot in the street where you notice they're all smoking cigarettes. Savannah, Georgia. So it's a universal thing. These little places, they're to be taken advantage of. Your parks can be as simple as a missing block or half a block or smaller. They're very important, those little bits of open space. They complement the streets and work together. This is in a new development in Texas. Just a little bobble in the street, which on a plan looks like nothing, takes away not much developable real estate. So it's not a big park, but in its context, becomes a very positive space. And by the way, these trees, I was talking about trees and giving them some soil. That tree isn't really planted in that. That's where they chose to do a little bit more of a high-tech planting. And that pavement is suspended, so there's actually more soil underneath that. You can do that, but it costs a lot of money. And here's an example. You are able to walk down that street, and you'd be able to sit on those expensive urban bus stop or benches, but nobody's going to want to. This is an example of building suburban form in an urban place. This is an old picture from Chicago when people were first starting to move back into the city at all, and they were just, any kind of development is good development, so they built this. Unfortunately, it's right across the street from a more full downtown building. Always keep in mind that the streets, there's going to be some streets that need to carry traffic that are going somewhere. That's fine. Even those streets need to be pleasant to walk along. But a lot of streets in the city, it's a balance between somebody in a car and somebody in a bicycle or on foot. Basic idea about walkability, by the way, that's Mary Madden on the left. You want it to be easy, efficient, interesting, and you see people doing it on Main Street all the time. This is talking about what happens when cars go fast. I don't know if you've seen something like this, but it's a combination. The idea is in a city where there are a lot of people living, except for maybe those big streets that are going through that you're very careful on. But most of the streets, you need to get the speeds down because people live here. And we're talking about a small area, so if somebody's driving through, you might add 2 minutes onto their trip. But if you get hit by a car going at 20 miles an hour, these are some old statistics. It has something to do with people's reaction time, being able to put on the brake, and something to do with literally when a 2,000 or 3,000 pound object hits you, the difference between getting a heck of a bruise and dying. 5% of the fatalities at a pedestrian getting hit by a car 20 miles an hour or under, it's pretty low. You've got a good chance. But if somebody hits you at 30 or over, you're probably just going to die. So you have to be very careful where you got busy streets going through a city. Just be careful about it. But most streets don't need that kind of speed. Again, I'm talking about the core, not talking about the whole administrative part of the city. But this is a big factor. It also affects how people perceive walking along a street. If they feel the speed of the cars, they don't feel comfortable. And I don't know, remember when David Letterman would do his top 10? I know somebody does. There are a number of people in here who are too young for that. But here's the top 10 for walkability. Starting at the top and heading for the big one. And they do. It's kind of a debatable list. But on-street parking, narrow streets, mixed land use, active building fronts. Don't want to walk in front of a blank building. Small block size. So these are the things. And by the way, if you walk down Main Street, it's interesting how much you have those. So we're talking about building on something that's good. If there's anyone out there thinking this, you can't do that in the 21st century, that's what they used to do. My grandfather did. We can't do that anymore. Well, we're actually starting to go back to that a lot more. This is a newer building, and one of the a quick point about different ways of living. There are some people who would like to live above a town square on like even the second story. I'm not one of them because Sunday morning, you know, there's some guy down there playing guitar or something, and I don't want to hear it. But lots of people do, plenty to occupy those buildings where there's a really active place. But in a good city or town, you got all these different, it's not all the same way of living. You've also got, you know, somebody might be living right on Main Street in a more intense, most intense area. But you also, here's a picture, it's a little bit fuzzy, but the details don't matter. If you look in the distance, there's some massive buildings, like 20 stories tall, which we're not remotely talking about here, but that's a very dense center just a couple of blocks away from these single family houses where this guy walking his dog, if he wants to, he could have turned the other way coming out of his house and gone down to all that activity and done whatever, all those different choices, whatever he wanted to down there. That's right at hand, but also because it's planned very specifically that that development, that intensity happens there, it helps preserve this. And that's the plan, is that there's some places where you develop intensely, and there's some places where you do not. So some part of this planning exercise we're coming up to is deciding where the development goes and where it doesn't, as you see fit. And a small point about money. This is Northern Virginia, Arlington County, where they had, that's a metro station in the background. So there's an underground metro, it pokes up there. Within a quarter-mile radius, the government had a lot of density to give away. They let people build these tall buildings if they built them the way they wanted to. Now this really intense development has carried most of the taxes for Arlington County. So the tax rate in about 30 or 40 years for these single family houses has not gone up because all this new intense development, they're contributing a lot more to the tax coffers of the county than they are pulling out. So it's an example of smart development. We know we used to do that. Here's people living above the dry cleaners. In the old days, it's a 19th century building, but here's a 20th century building. People living above the shops. There's a big market. A lot of people want to live in relatively intense urban environments. This is a smaller scale, but right behind us, you look up to the right, that's 6-story intense apartment buildings. And people pay a premium so they can live in this environment. If they want to come down and go into the bookstore or the nature store, they can. And by the way, this is on the back side. This is a same development. On one side, they have this real high intensity, big buildings, but where it meets the neighborhood, they took care, and they have, these are essentially townhouses, but they're detailed to look a little bit like bungalows. It's a huge step down, so it's a friendly face toward the neighborhood. They're being responsible because right across the street from this development were single family houses, not that different than Cedar Falls. Mary? Next phase.
So we've done a bit of talking here. I think what we want to do, should we do the bigger survey now or do the exercise? What do you think?
Exercise.
Okay. I think that's what's up next. Now we're going to stop talking. We're going to get you to talk and talk to each other and sort of think about, beyond one word, what is downtown Cedar Falls like today? Each of you should have on your tables a big map that looks pretty much like this. If you want to turn it over. And I'm going to describe a little bit what we're going to do here, and some folks are going to bring you some more dots, and these are going to be bigger than the ones you used over there, if that makes anybody happy. Not so many tiny, tiny dots. We want to do a couple of things. Before you get to the dots, we're going to bring a couple of black markers around. During this exercise, we'd like you talking to each other. You do not remotely need to reach agreement around your table. We're not trying to get consensus. We're trying to get a sense of what people think about today and to sort of capture it on these maps. So when you get the pins, the first thing we're going to ask you, we told you this was downtown, and someone asked, where's the study area? So we are pretty confident that most of you think this yellow line is a larger area than what you think of as downtown. So what we would like you to do is, with pins, and if we need to get some more pins, identify on the map, mark on the map, where you think the edge of downtown is today on your map. You can chat amongst yourselves, everybody can draw their own line, but where is downtown? When do you feel like you're not in downtown anymore? We'll let you, yeah. Where do you feel like, what's your concept of the edges of downtown?
That part of it as a line, I don't think it needs to go all the way over to
No, this is too far. But if you jog it over it clear like that.
We're actually just thinking it's the areas that we think of downtown now.
So then you get out into housing in the church road.
I think that several groups have moved beyond the edges of downtown. You can always come back and revisit it if you haven't quite determined where it is. Again, you don't have to reach consensus, but we want to talk about another issue related to the map, which is based on what is in downtown today. Again, you do not have to agree on your table, and we have more dots. We have plenty of dots if you need them at your table. But we would like you to put green dots on places in downtown that you like, that you think are strong places in downtown, and to put red dots on those places that you think could use some improvement. If you want to explain why, put a little number on your dot, and on the right-hand side of your map, there's places that you can say, red dot number 1, I don't like this because of X. Green dot number 1, I like this because of Y. So I know a couple of people are heading out, but if you could hold up for a couple of seconds here. Today we've really been talking a lot about what's here right now. And as we move forward, the thing that you need to think about and ask your friends and neighbors, etc., is what would we like to see in and around downtown in the future? That's going to be the big focus of the vision plan moving forward. That will be the big focus of the design charrette the beginning of June. Some of you did this on the way in. So on your way out, if you have not yet done this, the boards are in here. There are 2 groups. The 2 groups are the same, so you don't need to do both of them. But the question is just sort of gut reaction. Which of these things do you think are good, would be appropriate in and around downtown? The boards say neighborhood, and that would be sort of those close-in surrounding neighborhoods that are probably within the yellow boundary. And then some say downtown, so maybe that's that core area. I know many of you did it already on the way in. If you did not, if you would please do it before you head out tonight. You do not need to vote on every image, but if you want to, you are welcome to do that. The next thing I want to remind everybody is that we will be back with a big team doing several activities. I said at the beginning, this is a Friday to a Friday, and the specific dates, times, and locations will be available on the city website. Some of you got notifications. You can sign up to be notified. In addition, for this visioning effort, there is going to be a project website that will be going live tomorrow that's going to really focus on the visioning effort. It will have information. It will periodically have interactive things for folks. Tomorrow will be some just basic information, but by the end of the week, Friday or maybe Monday, but we're shooting for Friday, we're going to capture some of the exercises. Tonight's presentation will be available. If you have friends who were not here tonight, they can go to the website and see the presentation. Folks will be able to do a similar exercise as the mapping, places they like or don't like. They will be able to do that on the website. The survey that you just completed, people will be able to do that if they want to. So we want to try to engage people who were not here tonight, but we are very appreciative of all of you who did come out tonight. This gives us a really good sense of how passionately people do feel about downtown Cedar Falls. We understand we were competing, I think, with a hockey game tonight, so I'm sure there were other people who might be here. But I do want to thank you all. Let you know the website is going live. You can get to it, I believe, from the city website. You can get from this website back to the city. So we just want to make sure that people are aware what's going on. We want people involved on the front end. We don't want people coming out at the end saying, I didn't know anything was happening. I didn't know anything about this. Karen, do you guys want to say anything else? Or we thank you all for coming out tonight.